welcome to Sonic Talk 815. This is September the 4th, though I'm not actually here. This is not live. This is a pre-record because hopefully I'm on holiday, all being well. Been looking forward to this for ages. I'm going to be wandering around the sunny climes of Croatia. But I did record this with Will Gregory from Goldfrapp and more recently the Moog Ensemble, which has been a band or a group of musicians he's been working with for nearly 20 years now. We've interviewed him a number of times. We filmed some pieces. They've actually got a new album out on Mute, which is called Heat Ray. But before we get into that, I just want to tell you about our Patreon. Let me tell you about our Patreon. You get all of our reviews ad-free, so you don't have to put up with those pesky ads like this one. And also, we post extra content from many of our reviews, never-before-seen footage from the archives. We've got 70 sounds and patches posts, 137 exclusive videos, a growing collection of impulse responses from classic reverbs, and 36 sets of samples from reviewed units, many in decent sampler format. In fact, the music you're listening to now was mostly made using our decent sampler and sample sets. So if you want to join us, head over to patreon.com/sonicstate. There he is in his studio. How are you, Will?
Very good.
Excellent.
Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, this is so weird, isn't it? Because we sort of know each other, but we haven't seen each other for a little while. So I can see that the studio, you've still got the old faithful O2R there. Is that still the centerpiece, or have you switched it round to the? Is that the API behind you or the Calrec?
Behind is an Audix.
Audix.
Yeah, and now the O2R is just a little bit of a subservient role. It just submixes all the effects. So yeah, we're trying to move into a more kind of high-end world. Although the O2Rs are brilliant, I think, for what they are.
Absolutely. Well, we've spent many an hour in front of that. You considerably more than that, but yeah. So one of the reasons that we're getting together, I mean, I wanted to come and talk to you anyway, but as it happens, you have an album out, which is Heat Ray on Mute Records, which is was out on June the 14th, I believe, so I'm a bit behind the times. It's a kind of continuation of the sort of Moog Ensemble project, right?
Yeah. It's our first album, which is ridiculous because we've been going 20 years. But wow. I guess the Moog Ensemble has been a side project for everybody in it. So we just did it whenever somebody asked us to do it, because we all had, day jobs. Everybody in it is a professional musician in some capacity or other, and they're just friends. So so this felt like. There was a bit of time during pandemic when, everything stopped, that I was able to go, right, this is time to put down a marker and write from the ground up a new album that focuses completely on the ensemble, just using synths, sometimes just using one synth layered up, but also that uses an orchestra in places, because I think that's also an exciting thing to do, to bring the two together and see what their dynamic is. And so I'm really excited that we've finally done it, and that Mute were, very loyal, I think, to have put it out, because it's not, for Goldfrapp fans, it's not really anything. It's not an extension of that idea at all. It's quite different. I suppose you might even call it quite classical, although I noticed Radio 3 played it on one of their programs called Unclassified, which I quite like, because I don't think it really has a category. I don't know where the record shops are going to put it. But, that's just how actually with Alison, it was the same. We just made music that we wanted to make. We didn't really think about what would happen to it afterwards.
Interesting. Well, I did notice that it was billed as neoclassical, which I'm not sure exactly what that is. Is that new classical or not quite classical? I don't know. I mean, that's in the Mute blurb. So, I mean, they've got to write something, right? There must be a category somewhere in the bins that, you can flip to, but I've never seen it. I don't know what it means. Do you know what it means?
Neo, not really. I mean, there's neoclassical architecture, isn't it? Which tends to be, kind of trying to take something maybe like a functional building and put some pillars on it to make it look a bit sort of
Well,
retro, I suppose. I don't know, quasi classical, maybe you could call it.
yeah.
Um,
Well, it's not really the pitch, is it? When you put it on the tagline for the album, Heat Ray, sort of, quasi classical, or yeah,
yeah,
like classical with pillars on. Yeah,
that's right,
not.
like classical with pillars on. And also, by the way, it's all really mathematical and it's all about Archimedes. So, welcome in.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a wall of stuff to take on. But
But
at the same,
before we got there, I just think I should probably mention before, if anybody doesn't know about the Moog Ensemble, see, I'm saying Moog, and I notice you're saying Moog, and it's taken me many years of being chastised by lots of Moog disciples to start saying that. But it's interesting that but that's a whole different discussion, I guess. So the Moog Ensemble is effectively or up sort of prior to this was primarily a sort of vehicle for playing classical music with synthesizers in the sort of vein of switched on Bach, that kind of idea. And a lot of it was Bach, and then the canon of music that you played sort of expanded to compositions and other pieces as well. Is that sort of a roughly about the right way of saying it?
yeah, we started playing Bach, and it definitely, switched on Bach was the inspiration behind the group. Very much just taking the idea of playing music on these monophonic instruments, um, playing Bach, but not in the studio, not multi-tracking, not one person playing, but actually an ensemble
Yeah.
of monophonic instruments that all play together, like a string group or a brass group or a vocal group. So, and trying to say, well, why can't you do it as a synth group? And we've all got our little loudspeakers that we play through. So it is like an ensemble of acoustic instruments. It's just that all the instruments are synthesizers. And then once we'd got through playing some of that kind of classical thing, I think we then started adapting some of the music that we loved that wasn't necessarily that. So we do John Carpenter, we do a bit of Vangelis, and but then after that, I started to think we don't want to just be a tribute band to the kind of greats that have come before us. We want to show how these instruments are going to inhabit the future. And this is a kind of manifesto trying to open the doors to a new way of making music. So to that end, that's why I wanted it to be all original material, and to be a whole kind of put down a marker saying, well, this is where things could go with synthesizers. And we're using the old ones because I think they are classics, but they have many tricks or hoops they can jump through that have not been hitherto used. One of the things they can do is to be all linked together and triggered so that you can send them a load of information, rhythmic information that can be manipulated live, that you'd never be able to do with conventional instruments,
Yeah.
or even other kind of computer generated. So it's because it's got a live element. That two hands on a synth, if you're not playing the keyboard, actually opens up another world again.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's very. I mean, we recorded. So I was involved in one of the recordings, which was Archimedes Screw, which is everybody in a room using the acoustic space. Obviously, this album has been recorded with the Welsh BBC National Orchestra of Wales. I wondered a little bit about how those sessions were shaped, because I know when we did the Archimedes group, slightly different because we were doing it to video, so we had to do multiple takes for the shots rather than for the multi-track, though it did end up with a lot of multi-track information that was sort of selected and whatnot, but it was essentially a live take. I mean, did you approach that in the same way this time?
Well, with that recording that was a live take is the what's on the album. So for that piece, that was great. I didn't have to do any editing with it. I just had to mix it. And obviously we did other takes for the video, but actually there was one master recording that is what you hear on the record for Archimedes Screw. But yeah, all the other pieces were done slightly differently. So for example, the Claw, which is much more of an orchestral piece, is pretty much just the recording of the orchestra as we did it in one take in the concert. In fact, all the orchestra recordings are from the concert, so they are very much live. But I would then have been able to break down the various, strings, brass, percussion, woodwind. I could separate them. So if I didn't want any orchestra until a certain point, I could retrospectively re-orchestrate it. And I did do that a bit. I did sort of reduce because we had orchestra playing all the time, all the way through the
Right.
concert, which because it felt rude not to do that. They're all
Oh,
sitting.
sitting around, yeah.
Yeah. But for the album, I very much wanted to feature the synth. I might have to get a glass of water.
I was going to talk. Well, I did mean to ask this question a bit earlier, really, because I remember last time we met, we were beginning to work on this, and maybe a couple of times beforehand, you were sort of throwing all these mathematical conundrums at me, and I remember sort of thinking because it's in a way it's sort of almost like a traditional prog album in terms of concept, right? Because it's got a concept behind it, which is the mathematics of Archimedes. I mean, perhaps you could explain a little bit about what developed that thread and how it kind of grasped you, I suppose.
Well, I love watching YouTube videos of lectures, and it's something that I think has been one of the great boons of the internet, that you can enter university lecture halls and hear, really great people talking about their subject, which is in a way a lot easier than trying to get it out of a book.
Yeah.
Because it usually lasts an hour and it's pretty condensed. And so, one of the the channels I was looking at were these maths lectures and a lot of the maths people seem to be talking about their favorite mathematician, Archimedes. And I was like, well, why is he their favorite mathematician? There's obviously something going on here I don't know about. And so that led me down that rabbit hole of, looking up about Archimedes. And then when I was starting to bend my mind towards this album, I was thinking, well, maybe that would be a nice thing, to have almost like a lecture where somebody would come out and say, buoyancy theory, this is all to do with density of different substances, blah, 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 and floating and water. And did you know that Archimedes was the first person to figure, all this out? And then have some music that would follow that. So you'd get, it would be like the planets or
Okay.
a little bit. So it was definitely thinking about a concert scenario where you would be attending a concert and a lecture at the same time, and there would be some kind of synergy between the two, and that would be like a fun evening to go through. A bit like Peter and the Wolf, that classical piece of Orpheus.
I also confess, I mean, I was hearing there's so much it felt to me there was a lot of influence, or there is a lot of influence in it, because there's certainly synthesized parts, there's also orchestral parts as well. And I was hearing, I'm just trying to some of the ones I thought I spotted. You can tell me if I've got written down here for Archimedes' Legacy, Wonky Scarlatti. Does that and then Bach.
Well, yeah, no, I think that was actually the first piece I wrote, and it had it's got those kind of slightly retro harpsichordy sounds in it, lovely mellotron sounds, but also the concept is it's what you call a ground bass. So I wanted it to be a bass line that would then have various iterations of the same part fitting on top of it, and because it's three notes that descend, it's the idea was it was triangles,
Right.
one of the kind of basic concepts of geometry, and that then you could subdivide the triangles into, that was the kind of rather remedial level that my mathematical mind worked when it was trying to think about how to express things in music in a relation.
Oh, that's interesting.
So yeah, and I think that there's no doubt that Bach is very mathematical in his approach, and that it's good having those kind of rigors to limit yourself with to generate music. Otherwise, if everything goes, then it's quite hard to know where to start.
That's really interesting because I suppose as sort of modern musicians, perhaps less classically trained, we're kind of we're tuned to our ears and what feels good, and which is quite often why we always reach for the same chord shapes, the same thing. But I hadn't really thought about that. The early compositional techniques were using the mathematics of music in a theoretical sense to kind of create these unheard of shapes. I mean, as well as great skill and other things. And so, is that what you were trying to apply the mathematical approach to some of the compositions here, or did that stretch across all of them?
No, not all of them. I mean, some of them, yes. So that is all based on superimposed triangles. Um, the so let's see. The claw is very much just a bit of um, what do you call it? It's a descriptive piece of music. It's describing a claw going into the sea, pulling ships out, and so it's a bit like a piece of film music or program music.
Yeah.
But then when we come to circles and pi, that reflects a lot on Archimedes' understanding of spirals. So you get these pulses that then kind of have delays on them.
I've got a bit of radiophonic kind of in the intro with the textures, but then I said it got towards the end. It sort of feels like there's quite a lot of. It sounded like there was some almost Bond type John Barry esque elements to it.
Yeah, well, it gets quite dramatic.
Yeah,
because I think it's quite, Archimedes is the first person to try and give a number to pi, or at least
really?
express it as a
Okay.
fraction. Before that, the Greeks just said pi, which is, well, what's pi? Oh, it's the relationship between the diameter and the circumference. That's it. That's all you get from us. Sorry. We don't go near that because we know it's an irrational number, but we can't quite admit that to ourselves because that would be somehow sacrilegious. But Archimedes was like, well, what is it? So he approached trying to define it. And then he would use that in terms of how to talk about spirals and all kinds of other mathematical geometric shapes. So for me, that, it's like throwing drops in water with expanding circular waves. But then gradually as it builds up, there's a sense of the momentousness of this idea of, this completely irrational number that even today's is, sorry, I should say that again. It's all over. It's all over general relativity. That pi is one of the things that's in Einstein and lots of current physics. So it's one of the
Right. It's
most
a real
profound.
building one of the most basic building blocks of science. That's really
Yeah.
interesting. Just hold that thought. I'm just going to interrupt here for a short word from our friends over at Isotope.
In a world full of noise, cut through with Isotope RX11, the complete suite of audio repair tools for post-production, music, and content creation. Powered by cutting-edge machine learning and industry-first technology. This is everything you need to clean up your audio in seconds. Fix flaws with laser precision and release your tracks with confidence. RX11, the definitive toolkit for audio repair.
We could probably talk about the science for a long time, and I know you've obviously given it
probably could,
a lot more thought to it than I have. I mean, I'm finding it fascinating. But I suppose the other thing, I mean, going back to the session, so when you created these pieces from scratch, because I know that the way you generally work is to generally make fairly fulsome sort of demos or initial ideas of the track. Were you doing it that way? Were you sort of thinking about it in terms of writing on notation on paper, or were you kind of jamming it into the computer, and then building it up sort of ready for the orchestra? How did that go?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, that's more or less it. Sort of, doing jamming, finding sounds. Sometimes just saying, right, I'm just going to use one instrument like the ARP 2600 and see what that can do, and playing things in, sequencing them. Probably not recording myself physically playing, probably quite often,
Mm.
linking up, so sequencing the sound, making a texture, making a piece, and then I gave that to this wonderful man, Ian Gardner, to orchestrate. I never had to put pen to paper, by the way. I don't do that anymore.
Right.
Probably, I'd still be here doing that if I was trying to do that.
But you can. I mean, you are musically trained, so I mean, it's not a complete sort of obscure concept to you. You've got the kind of the building blocks of it. So yeah.
No, but it was a revelation when I first managed to make a computer print out the music that I played in, and without having to go through the labor of writing it out. An amazing moment. But at the same time, Ian, so therefore would apply his magic to interpreting. When I would put some of the orchestral parts in, just on the MIDI samplers, and then he would interpret and shape and double and expand what the orchestral part was, and also then do the lovely job of printing it all out in Sibelius, so that the musicians then had parts, not just in the orchestra but also the synths, and then we would rehearse the synths, and then we would did it together with the orchestra with Ben Foster conducting, this great conductor that I've worked with a lot. But then afterwards I had also the option to go back and overlay the performance on top of the demos. So then quite often I would have a choice between what was played live in the concert and what I had actually demoed. So I had it, so it was quite a rich thing. It took ages actually.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I've experienced the chaos of your multi-tracks, Will, so I can vouch when it comes to orchestra. And then when you bring in the concept of maybe more than one take of an orchestra, and then it all starts to get. I mean, it's quite a skill to manage all of that stuff and be able to
more than one take. So that's one parameter that we didn't have to deal with. But,
Phew.
Yeah.
Phew.
No, I know. I'm that's the thing. I love building things, and then once you've built your edifice, then you start stripping away, and you strip away and you strip away and you strip away, and sometimes what you're left with just tumbles to the ground because it was never anything in the first place.
Right.
Or sometimes what you stripped away, you realize is actually the building, and then you put that back, and so there's I think it is, isn't it? It's like sculpting what you create. There's two phases. There's the spaghetti at the wall phase, and then there's the selection phase.
Yeah, no, interesting. So how did that work with the orchestra? Because obviously you can't. I mean, it's very expensive to get to rehearse with an orchestra. I mean, and usually these people, you turn up in the room and that's your shot. You've got your, whatever it is, you got till 4:30 on one day, and I suppose if you're doing the gig, you've got that day. Did you have much time to kind of work with them? Because I mean, working with orchestras is a beautiful thing, or any sort of string section, but when you've sequenced things as the sort of framework underneath, they don't pick up and move in the same way, to the same quantization and the same thing. Did you have to do a lot of adaptation of tempo, and how did that work with the orchestra, or did you sort of know what to expect when you got there?
What we did was we got the benefit of 2 full days rehearsal, I think.
Right.
So, everybody kind of was in a good place. And then we recorded the concert. And that was all done live. So Ben was, would have his, however he would remember what the tempi were. And then we had these recordings. And of course, they were very elastic. They sped up and slowed, all the good things that an orchestra did. But if I wanted to use a demo, I then asked somebody to stretch every bar. Retrospectively. Luckily I didn't have to do that. Somebody else did that, so that the map of the performance then retrospectively fitted the quantized demos.
So you quantized the audio to the grid rather than move the grid to the performance, or was it the other way around? Okay, right, I got you. Yeah, interesting.
And then you see, because we'd recorded it obviously as a stereo, but also each section I asked to have a split from. So we had the strings, the brass, the woodwind, the basses, the violin, so, and the percussion. And so then I had a map of, if I didn't want anything but the brass in a certain part, I had access to that. So I could retrospectively kind of replace the orchestra. And in fact, that's what we did. We
Right.
placed to make, because I did want it to feel like a synth album, not a kind of orchestral album.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. And I mean, I've listened to it. The reason we're not playing this stuff as much as you might expect is because the YouTube algorithm will just basically penalize us. Even if Will says it's okay, there's algorithms that just do that. So I'll point everybody to where this can be found and where it can be bought and all of that stuff. So don't worry about that. So I noticed also, so was everything sequenced from the synth parts, or were there some that were sort of more free flowing, played to music? Because I noticed there's sort of elements of systems to some of the tracks, and there's elements which are a lot more sort of fluid sounding. So in terms of how the synths were played.
So the only one that was done as a playback sequence was the one that you worked on, Archimedes Screw.
Right.
So Ben, the conductor, that was the only piece that he had click to follow. And amazingly, the orchestra followed him without click, so they're just so brilliant. I don't know how orchestras work. It's a mystery to me how people that are 100 yards apart play together in time, and maybe even 50 yards from the conductor. Anyway, but that's one of the mysteries of an orchestral ensemble. But so it meant that everything else was played live. So it was very much on the stick, and most of the time I did grid it back, but not all the time. So sometimes I would just let things play, especially if they were very much orchestral led.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a real kind of mishmash of grid and totally freeform.
Interesting. Well, it sounds very natural. I mean, that's the thing, but it also sounds very cohesive. I mean, there's quite a lot of, like I say, sort of variation. I mean, it sounds like it has an identity, but as I say, there's quite a lot of orchestral influence and just sort of nods to and what it sounds like. So a great piece of work for sure. So live, what were the main sort of ensemble synth players playing?
Well, we've got they're not all Moogs, even though
No.
that's what we call ourselves, but there's 3 or 4 of us that have got Moogs. Maybe 5 of us actually. Mini Moogs, Little Fatty is in there. I think someone might even, maybe we shouldn't mention it, but it's got a Behringer Mini.
All right, a Poly D or a Mini, yeah.
And then on top of that, there'll be some other old synths, like I love the Korg 700S. Ruth plays that. And there'll be, what else have we got? When we introduce the members of the group, Ross plays a Roland Compuphonic.
There's an there's a SHO, what? Not an SHO, SHO9 in there, wasn't there? Didn't Hazel play one of those?
There's an SHO9, yeah, but then there's this Compuphonic CS. I can't remember. It's got a really long. Takes about 30 seconds to name what it is. It's a lovely, and it's a huge, great lump of stuff that only plays one note at a time. I love it. And and Ross is brilliant at getting fantastic sounds out of that. And then Viv sometimes has his Moog modular.
Yeah.
And I think then some people have these Oberheim, modern. What's it called? The
OB6.
The OB6. Yeah, I think a couple of people play
Hazel.
those.
Hazel has one of those, doesn't she? I think. Yeah.
And I think Hinako. Do you know Hinako Amori?
Yes. Yeah.
I think she has one too. So that they get the luxury of being able to press a button and recall the next song.
Yeah, well, because I've seen that, because I've been at rehearsals, because obviously you filmed the rehearsals for Archimedes Screws, or certainly was at the rehearsals, and there's all these times where the orchestration is not just about the notation, it's about maybe the envelope shape, the timbrality, the dynamics. And was there much, because the Moog Ensemble, when they play Bach, there's very much a lot of wind control, which is an incredibly incredibly expressive way to play synthesizers, and led to much of that early stuff. I think we shot a piece many years ago with you rehearsing in your garage, and it sounded like brass, but because of the expressivity that those wind controllers could add to the whole thing, it's very interesting how your ear is fooled because the shapes of the dynamics are very similar to what are done with the human mouth or the breath control.
Yes, I think WinSynth, that's one of the revelations that came along, post starting the ensemble. The fact that a mini Moog invented in 1969 will talk perfectly well via a bit of 80s technology like a WX7 or an EWI with a MIDI to CV converter that was invented in the 90s, So you put those three things together from 3 decades, and suddenly you've got this this tool which is so expressive, because if you tongue, you can
Yeah.
you can't do that on a keyboard, not to the same extent. You can't flip around the octaves on a mini. It's only got 3.5 octaves, but on the WinSynth you kind of got 6, so you've got instant access to a much bigger range. And like you say, if you blow harder, you open the filter, which becomes your expressive dynamic quality. So yeah, I mean, you've got to be careful with these WinSynths, I would say, because it's very easy, to go a bit Brecker Brothers with them and go a bit kind of Fusaki. So that's the only thing. And I find myself having to rein myself in a bit with it, because it can sound a bit like I've just crossed some taste barrier. But essentially they are amazing. And you can get right down the bottom and play bass lines, or you can whiz up the top and play leads.
And maybe people don't also know, but you as you've said, in another life, a saxophone player, that was your sort of primary instrument, and how you first sort of maybe became involved in, I guess, pop music. I mean, for want of a better terms of it, obviously touring with Tears and whatnot. Do you find that you can still get the chops you need when you're doing that? I mean, do you play an actual wind instrument very often to sort of just for whatever reason on any recordings, or to entertain yourself, or weddings? I don't, whatever.
Weddings. Yeah. No, I don't really play the sax anymore. We never used it with Goldfrapp, and so when we started that, it kind of got put in the corner and gathering dust a bit. And I do miss it, because actually the aerobic quality of blowing a wind instrument is quite invigorating. It's quite a nice, healthy process, I think, apart from the fact you're gradually deafening yourself, probably. But with the WinSynth is actually quite different, because the way you blow it, you don't have to form the embouchure in the same way. It's quite a different thing. It's a bit easier to just pick it up and play it. You haven't got all the physical effort that you might need with a saxophone. So but you do need to play it in. So I will, before we start our concerts in a month or so, I'll be getting back into some practice just to get familiar with it again.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So interesting. So, I mean, and that is because is that primarily what you'll be playing? Because you're the sort of the ensemble leader, and quite often you're playing that. And I seem to remember most of the tracks that, at least when I was working, did the sound, you were playing a wind instrument rather than playing the keyboard version. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, most cases it's easier for me to do that. I've got much more facility on the sax than I have on a keyboard.
Right. Dynamics. You could drive the dynamics a lot more obviously as well, I suppose. Yeah.
And in terms of reading music and playing, I don't have to do, when you're looking away from the music to see where your hand is, I'm not.
Yes.
That's kind of thing.
Yeah, of course.
But not all the time, so it's not a hard and fast rule, because I use the Mellotron too, with some of the sounds, and that's obviously played with that, because it's polyphonic. So it's a bit of a range. But the three of us, funnily enough, that are sax players, Simon, Ross, and myself, have all now got WinSynths, and we're all quite we feel not superior is the wrong word, but we feel kind of very comfortable doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a huge difference to the tonality. I mean, anyone who so you're going to be touring this album, or is it just more general Moog Ensemble tour? I guess without the orchestra, right? That would be probably quite expensive, I'd imagine.
Well, yes, but I have to say, somebody who's been a big supporter of the Moog Ensemble over the years is Myrick Bowen, who now runs Britain's Symphonia. And Myrick came to the concert we did of Archimedes and has come back and said, come and do some concerts with the Archimedes and the Britain's Symphonia, which are like a sort of chamber orchestra. And so we've got 3 gigs with them coming up.
Oh,
We've got the
fantastic.
8th of October at the Barbican. We've got the 9th in Basingstoke and the 11th in Saffron Walden, with the Britain's Symphonia, so this kind of super lush 9 cents plus 32 musicians.
Wow, that'll be.
So I'm really excited about that. So to actually do it more than once as well, we'll start to get into a bit of a groove. And we have got 2 other dates in the midst of that. We're doing Hidden Notes Festival up at Stroud on the 21st of September, but that will be standalone Moogs. And we've got another one on the 10th in Southampton.
That's a busy schedule for you guys, really. I mean, because the thing is, it's a lovely thing, but it's also, I imagine, quite unwieldy and difficult to maneuver because there's so many people involved, and obviously, the budgets being what they are, it makes it harder to find outlets for those kind of venues. So, I mean, what you're being able to achieve is quite unique in that sense. There's nothing like this that I can think of. I mean, there's very few kind of touring anything with more than 3 or 4 musicians in it at the moment. So, I mean, hats off.
You're so right. You're absolutely so right. It is a bit of a labor of love in that way. It doesn't really, it just about washes its face, and means that we can do it. So it is very much because we love doing it that we're doing it. And yeah, I mean, everybody gets paid, but it's, not only that, but because we're not out there, week in, week out doing stuff, and everybody else has other commitments, it's quite hard to say, right, we've got this one gig in Liverpool, and so
there's rehearsals as well, of course.
So that tour that you wanted to do, you'll have to choose between getting a proper job and doing a tour, or doing this one gig with us. So it's not only, it's quite logistically, but that's just the nature of what it is, and hopefully it will become more of a full-time thing. I'm hoping that this album will have some kind of traction and people will get hip to the whole idea of 9 synthesizers.
Yeah, well, it's I've seen it several times and done the sound a couple of times, and it is a great experience. And most people that I've been at those gigs with come away going, wow, I just didn't know that that's the sort of thing that it could sound like, and it's very impressive. Just going to take a short break there to have a message from our friends over at Native Instruments.
I use Contact literally every day. I have so many Contact instruments.
I don't think I've heard anything more realistic than these libraries.
It sounds like a live piano in the room.
It just allows me to just spread my wings with production.
Once again, we thank Native Instruments for their support of this show. Bringing it back to synthesizers, is that a 3100 or a 32 or a 3300 next to you, that Korg?
That's a 3300, one of the rare ones.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
And this was, I'm bringing it into, maybe more into the synthesizer pocket as well, because during the years that we've worked together, I know that there's often, you have a decent collection of instruments, but sometimes, one comes out and becomes a kind of cornerstone to maybe a composition or a series of compositions. Is there something at the moment that you're really kind of focusing on in the synth world that you really are like, yeah, I need to do more work with this, or I am doing more work with this?
Well, I think I feel awful about all of them that I don't play, because they're all great and they all feel a bit neglected some of the time. I've got a Oberheim 2 voice.
Yeah.
I love.
Yeah.
And the Mini is always what I play with the wind synth, and is probably the most sort of used and often used. But I love the Rolands too. The Roland 09, the 101, the 02. Those are all fantastic instruments. Very instant to get something great sounding with. And somebody who keeps all these instruments going, because they do need a TLC. I'm sure you know of Danny Wilson, who repairs things, but she also built me a synth. So I've got this one-off monophonic synth, that maybe what I'll do is I'll take a photo of it and send it to you, because it's like, what I did was I asked Danny to make a synth that you could put an oscilloscope across, that would demonstrate all the parts of a conventional synthesizer, what the wave shapes were, what the LFO was, what the filter, the envelope, and just plug a couple of banana plugs into it. And I said, kind of like a breadboard instrument, so all everything exposed. And so what she did was actually make a synth like that, but actually using breadboards as what that's all stuck to. But I'll send you a photo, and that is actually a really gorgeous instrument. So it's not just this kind of educational sort of thing. It's actually an instrument in its own right that's very beautiful.
Wow. So, I mean, as well as this stuff that you're doing, this album which you're currently promoting, I mean, I do notice there's quite a lot of filmic stuff in there. And I know you do a lot of work to media and to picture. Is this, it sounded like you could possibly be very quietly pitching for the next Bond soundtrack, but I wonder whether... so what are you working on, I suppose, is what I'm getting to.
Well, now, I've just, we're obviously promoting the record. We've got gigs coming up. I've also got a project for Audible, where this lovely director I've worked on a couple of theatre things with, Eleanor Rode, is working on a script called Billionaire for Sale, which is it's not just somebody reading the book. It's a kind of dramatized version. So there's actors doing it, and so I've got that to fill in. And then there's inevitably some wildlife stuff that's going to happen later in the year. There's always something to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I mean, the Golf Rat project, while it's sort of currently dormant, is that sort of, do you think that's going to come back, or do you feel it's run its course, or, have you got plans?
Well, there's some part of me that feels it's run its course. 7 albums. The more albums we did, the kind of narrower the selection of something that we wanted to do that wasn't just repeating ourselves became, because we hated repeating ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think I'm sort of when the pandemic hit, it became very hard for us to work together, and that sort of created a bit of a natural pause. And after that, Alison has gone on, and I'm sort of delighted that she has, to do some stuff on her own thing, and sort of running with the Golf Rat baton. And I've enjoyed doing my thing. I've enjoyed doing this album and various other film projects that I've been working on in the meantime. Whether we'll get back together and work together again, I don't know. But, the door is always open to that idea.
Yeah.
So that may happen.
Do you think, I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because your musical career and your musical output has spanned so many different sort of genres and types of music, whether it be stuff for media, advertising, theatre productions, neoclassical, I hate to use that word, Goldfrapp. But, there's something about being involved in pop music which there's a certain immediacy to it, even though it can take an awfully long time to craft. The reaction you get to it because of the mass audience. Do you sort of, as musicians, we're often fed by that. Do you kind of miss that sometimes?
The discipline of writing music without a vocal is, instrumental music. That's a separate discipline, and I think that is challenging in a whole different set of ways.
Sure.
And really, really interesting to explore. And also, I'm aware that I like the short format. I like 4.5 minutes as your kind of, or 5 minutes maximum as your time limit. Maybe one day I'll learn how to write music that has a longer arc in terms of how long it takes to express itself. But yeah, I think I'm still part of that pop, grab them and hold
Right.
them and then let them go before they get bored. I like that.
That's interesting, isn't it? There's a whole sort of less notes, more reverb is often an approach that one can take with if you want to slow things down a bit and do that kind of stuff. So one last question: what's the last synth you bought, and why?
I brought a Prophet 5, a reissue.
Okay.
Because lots of people said they loved it. I'd never had a Prophet 5. And everyone said, don't get an old one. They just, I don't want to badmouth them, but everyone says that they tend to go wrong. So the new one is, it's opening another field of exploration that I'd never had in the past to try this instrument out. So that sounded exciting. That there was a new one, basically made the same way, but wasn't going to fall to bits immediately. Hopefully.
Excellent. So still room for polysynths as well in this world of monos. I mean, there's so much synthesis and synthesizers out there. Do you find that you're drawn to software for convenience? Because for many people, the the actual physicality and the requirements of owning and operating analog equipment can become very inconvenient, particularly when working to deadlines. Do you find yourself gravitating towards the more in the box just to get to the deadline and the repeatability?
I've got nothing against in the box. I think in the box is great. I think, what in the box has, like you say, is the kind of instantness of, and sometimes very good. I mean, the Logic monosynth is a very big, fat, raspy thing, and I think sometimes that can be, wonderful. But what you haven't got, of course, is all of the knobs.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's always going to be a place for that. What's quite interesting, when the soft synths came out to begin with, the soft minis and, the ARPs and all the rest of it, the Odysseys, I was thinking, oh shit, that all my synths are now going to be something people will be throwing in skips, but the opposite happened, didn't it? And in some ways, the soft synths became advertisements for the real thing, and so I think that's still true, and I think it is because they are beautiful. They're like looking at a little city of knobs and sound makers that is very attractive, and then of course with your hands, which is what musicians use to play music rather than a mouse, is what you get to interface with it. Now, I mean, this is a conversation I'm sure you've had millions of times.
Yeah, well, it's design. There are many design classics, aren't there, and many synth design classics, and they're classics for a reason, because they lessen the resistance between the idea and the creativeness, and that's kind of what we ultimately want in many ways. We just want to be able to go like this and just do it. I mean, and yes, you have to learn a little bit, but it's still kind of the most direct route, I think.
Yeah, and you're a flagship for it, aren't you? Because that's people. I think what's so good about you and your site is that people can go and watch you play the instruments, because you actually are really good at it, and get inspired again to think about owning one of these things.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I try and do my bit. I mean, it's more about the kind of musical expression and exploration, the connection with it and having something that happens. And that doesn't matter whether it's hardware or software, but it's easier with hardware because you can, use all your digits and all of that stuff. It'd be interesting to see where things go as technology takes us out of these paradigms, and we'll be able to maybe do some things we had never even thought of, use more limbs, more feet out, everything all at the same time. Well, it's been a joy to talk to you. Thank you so much for giving us this time. The album Heat Ray is out now on Mute Records. You can go and buy it. I think that you can still buy it physical copies. You can buy CDs. You can buy gatefolds. You can buy downloads on Bandcamp. It's everywhere. And of course, the gigs. Hopefully, is it just UK, or are you going to be heading out elsewhere in the world?
So far, it's just the UK. So we're in Stroud, 21st of September. We're at the Barbican the 8th of October with Britain Symphonia, and the 10th and the 11th in Basingstoke and Saffron Walden. We've got another gig at Southampton, Anvil, I think, on the 9th. And then we're in Liverpool for another festival on the 21st of November. And then there'll be a load, hopefully, next year.
Brilliant. Thanks, Will.
Thank you very much, Nick. Lovely to talk to you.